In the autumn of 1997, David and Claire Mercer left their two young children with Claire's mother for a weekend anniversary hike along the Whispering Pines Trail in Northern California. They packed their tent, their camera, and enough supplies for 3 days in the wilderness. They never came home. For 26 years, their disappearance remained one of the Pacific Northwest's most haunting unsolved mysteries. Then, in October 2023, a wildlife photographer discovered something buried beneath the roots of a fallen cedar tree. Something that would finally answer the question everyone had been asking for more than 2 decades. What happened on that trail? But some answers once found reveal horrors far worse than the unknown. If stories of long-buried secrets and disturbing truths hidden in plain sight intrigue you, consider subscribing. The journey ahead will test everything you think you know about love, loyalty, and the darkness that lurks in the spaces between trees where no one can hear you scream. The package arrived on a Tuesday morning in early October, 26 years to the day after Claire and David Mercer were last seen alive. Emma Mercer stood in her Seattle apartment kitchen, coffee growing cold in her hand, staring at the unmarked box on her counter. No return address, no postage, just her name, written in careful block letters across brown paper wrapping, and beneath it, a single line that made her blood run cold. For the daughter who still remembers, her phone buzzed. A text from her brother Marcus. "Did you get a package?" Emma's fingers trembled as she typed back, "Yes, you too. Don't open it alone. I'm coming over." She set the phone down and circled the box like it was something alive, something dangerous. Emma had been 6 years old when her parents vanished. Marcus had been 8. They'd spent their childhood in the shadow of that disappearance, raised by a grandmother who grew quieter each year, who flinched every time the phone rang, who kept the missing persons flyer on the refrigerator until the paper yellowed and curled at the edges. The search had lasted 3 weeks. Bloodhounds, helicopters, volunteer search parties, combing every inch of the Whispering Pines Trail and the surrounding wilderness. They'd found the couple's car in the trailhead parking lot, registration current, doors unlocked. Inside, David's wallet, Claire's purse, a cooler with melted ice and spoiled sandwiches. The tent and sleeping bags were missing. So were David's hiking boots and Claire's favorite fleece jacket. No bodies were ever found. No witnesses came forward. The case went cold, then dormant, then became just another tragic story, filed away in a banker's box, in some evidence room, gathering dust while the people who remembered slowly forgot. But Emma had never forgotten. Neither had Marcus. She heard his key in the lock 30 minutes later. Her brother looked as unsettled as she felt, his usually neat hair disheveled, dark circles under his eyes that suggested he'd slept as poorly as she had since receiving the package. "You didn't open it," he said. "Not a question. I wanted to wait for you." They stood on opposite sides of the kitchen counter, the box between them like an unexploded bomb. Marcus pulled a paring knife from the drawer, his movements slow and deliberate. Emma noticed his hands were shaking. "Whatever's in there," she said quietly, "we face it together." He nodded and carefully sliced through the tape. Inside, nested in tissue paper, was a small Ziploc bag. Through the plastic, Emma could see dirt, dried leaves, and something else. Something that looked like fabric. Beside the bag was an old Kodak film canister, the kind that hadn't been commonly used in decades, and a folded piece of paper. Marcus reached for the note first. His face went white as he read. "What does it say?" Emma asked. When he looked up at her, his eyes were filled with something Emma had never seen in her analytical, logical brother's expression before. Pure visceral fear. "It says, he whispered, "that they're not lost, that they're still out there, and that if we want the truth, we need to go back to where it all began." The Whispering Pines Trail hadn't changed much in 26 years, though the parking lot had been repaved and a new sign warned hikers to stay on marked paths and carry emergency beacons. Emma stood beside her rented SUV, the October wind cutting through her jacket, and tried to reconcile her fragmented childhood memories with the reality before her. She remembered this place, not clearly, but in the way you remember a dream, all sensations and emotion, with the details blurred at the edges. Her grandmother had brought them here once, years after the disappearance, though Emma couldn't recall why. She remembered crying. She remembered Marcus holding her hand so tightly it hurt. "You're sure about this?" Marcus asked, shouldering his backpack. He'd insisted on bringing proper hiking gear, emergency supplies, satellite phone, GPS tracker, everything their parents probably should have had, but didn't. Emma pulled the film canister from her pocket. They'd had it developed at a specialty shop that handled old film. The technician had given them odd looks when he saw the images. 12 photos total. The first few were normal. Claire and David at the trailhead, smiling, young, alive. David pointing at a trail marker. Claire laughing at something off camera. Then the images became strange, dark. The last photo showed what appeared to be the inside of a tent at night, illuminated by flashlight, and in the corner of the frame, barely visible, was something that didn't belong, a shape that might have been a hand, but the proportions were wrong, the fingers too long. "I'm sure," Emma said. "Whoever sent that package knows what happened to them, and they want us to know too." They started up the trail. The morning air was crisp, the sky a brilliant autumn blue that seemed at odds with the knot of dread in Emma's stomach. Other hikers passed them going the opposite direction, a young couple with matching backpacks, an older man with a dog, all of them oblivious to the fact that this beautiful trail had swallowed 2 people whole and kept them for more than 2 decades. The note had been specific. Mile marker 4.7. Look for the cairn that doesn't belong. Beneath it, truth. Beneath truth, horror. Marcus checked his GPS. "We're at mile 3. Another 45 minutes, give or take." They walked in silence, the only sounds their breathing and the crunch of gravel beneath their boots. Emma found herself studying the tree line, the way the shadows gathered between the trunks, the way the forest seemed to press in from both sides, despite the trail being wide and well-maintained. She thought about her parents walking this same path, young and in love, celebrating their 10th anniversary, unaware that they had hours, maybe days, left to live. The police had theorized they'd gotten lost, succumbed to exposure or injury, but the search dogs had tracked their scent to mile marker 5, and then lost it completely, as if David and Claire Mercer had simply ceased to exist at that point. No animal scattering of remains, no shredded tent, no sign of a struggle, just absence where there should have been something. "Emma," Marcus said, stopping abruptly. "Look." Ahead, just off the trail, was a small stack of rocks, a cairn, but it was positioned oddly, not at any junction or significant landmark, just sitting in a small clearing, surrounded by dense undergrowth. The stones were dark, almost black, and arranged in a way that seemed deliberate, but wrong somehow. The proportions unsettling. "That's not a trail marker," Emma said. "No, it's not." They approached carefully. Up close, Emma could see something had been carved into the largest stone at the base. Not words exactly, but symbols, scratched deep into the rock face, the grooves still sharp, despite obvious weathering. She pulled out her phone and took photos, though she had no idea what the symbols meant. Marcus knelt beside the cairn. "Help me move these." Together they carefully dismantled the stack. The stones were heavy, water-worn, and unnaturally cold to the touch. When they removed the last one, they found disturbed earth beneath, soft and dark. "Do we dig?" Emma asked. Marcus was already pulling a small folding shovel from his pack. He dug carefully, methodically, going down 6 inches, then a foot. The soil gave way easily, as if it had been disturbed recently. Then his shovel hit something. It was a metal box, the kind used for waterproof storage, covered in dirt, but intact. Marcus lifted it carefully from the hole, hands shaking. Emma knelt beside him as he brushed away the soil and opened the latches. Inside was a journal, David Mercer's journal, his name written on the inside cover in his distinctive slanted handwriting. Beneath it, wrapped in a plastic bag, was a jacket. Emma recognized it immediately, even covered in stains that had turned the green fabric nearly black in places. Claire's jacket, the one she'd been wearing when she vanished. Emma's breath caught. Marcus's face had gone pale, but he reached for the journal with steady hands. The first entry was dated October 10th, 1997. 3 days before David and Claire were reported missing. Day 1. Anniversary trip. Claire is happier than I've seen her in months. The trail is beautiful, though there's something about the forest here that feels different, older somehow. We made camp at mile marker 5, just off the main trail like the ranger suggested. Found a perfect clearing with a view of the valley. Claire found mushrooms growing in a perfect circle near the campsite. Said they looked magical. I told her not to touch them. Marcus flipped forward. The next entry was dated the following day. Day 2. Something strange last night. Woke up around 3 a.m. to sounds outside the tent. Footsteps, but the rhythm was off. Too many steps, or maybe not enough. Hard to explain. Claire was still asleep. I listened for almost an hour before it stopped. This morning, I found tracks around our tent. Large, barefoot, but the spacing between the toes was wrong. Claire thinks I'm imagining things. She's probably right. Spending too much time in the dark makes you see things that aren't there. Emma felt ice sliding down her spine. Marcus continued reading aloud, his voice barely above a whisper. Day 3. We should leave. I wanted to pack up this morning, but Claire insists we stay one more night like we planned. She says I'm being paranoid, but I know what I heard last night, and I know what I saw. There was someone, something, watching us from the tree line. Tall, too tall. When I shined my flashlight at it, the eyes reflected back, but they were too high off the ground, at least 7 feet up, maybe 8, and the way it moved when it retreated into the shadows, all wrong. Like joints bending in directions they shouldn't. I'm writing this while it's still light. Claire is taking photos. She doesn't believe me. She thinks it's a bear or a deer. I know better. I've hunted these woods before. This isn't an animal. At least not one I recognize. The next page was different. The handwriting had deteriorated, becoming jagged and frantic. It came into camp. Claire saw it this time. We're inside the tent. Flashlight off, trying to stay quiet. It's circling us. I can hear it breathing, if that's what it is. Sounds like wind through a hollow tree. Claire is crying, trying not to make noise. I told her to be still. The camera is within reach, but I'm afraid to move. I'm afraid if it knows we're awake, it will. The entry ended there, abruptly, as if David had been interrupted. Marcus turned the page. The final entry was written in a different hand. Claire's. David is gone. It took him. I watched through the tent mesh as it dragged him into the forest. He didn't scream. I think he was trying to protect me, trying to stay quiet so it wouldn't come back for me. But I know it will. I can hear it out there, in the trees, waiting. I'm writing this because someone needs to know what happened. We came to these woods thinking they were safe, beautiful. We didn't know about the old places, the spaces between where things that shouldn't exist can cross over. There are stories about this area, stories the rangers don't tell tourists, stories about hikers who vanish, about shapes in the forest that wear human faces but move like insects, about the mushroom circles that mark doorways. David thought I was being superstitious when I mentioned the folklore. Now he's gone, and I understand. I understand everything now. If you're reading this, if you found this box, you need to leave. Don't look for us. Don't try to understand. Just go. Before it. The page ended there, torn. The rest of the journal was blank. Emma's hands were shaking so badly, she could barely hold the book. Marcus was staring into the middle distance, his face expressionless in that way he got when processing trauma. When the analytical part of his brain was working overtime to rationalize the irrational. This isn't real, he said quietly. This has to be someone's sick joke. But Emma was looking at the jacket, at the dark stains, at the tears in the fabric that looked like claw marks, long, deep gouges that had shredded the material. Marcus, she said, her voice barely audible. Something killed them. A sound echoed through the forest, distant, a long, hollow note that might have been wind through the trees, or might have been something breathing, something large. They both froze. The sound came again, closer this time, from somewhere off the trail, back in the direction they'd come. And then, carried on the wind, another sound. Footsteps, multiple sets, moving through the underbrush in a rhythm that was almost right, but not quite. Emma stuffed the journal into her backpack while Marcus hastily shoved the jacket back into the metal box. The footsteps were getting closer, accompanied by the sound of branches snapping, underbrush being disturbed. But the pattern was wrong. Too many steps, overlapping in ways that suggested either multiple entities or something with more than two legs. The car, Marcus whispered. We need to get back to the car. They started down the trail at a fast walk that quickly became a jog. Emma's heart hammered against her ribs, her breath coming in short gasps that had nothing to do with exertion. Behind them, the footsteps matched their pace, not pursuing exactly but following, tracking. The rational part of her brain, the part that had earned her a PhD in forensic psychology, insisted there had to be an explanation. Hikers, animals, echo effects in the forest, playing tricks on their perception. But the primal part, the ancient hindbrain that remembered when humans were prey, was screaming at her to run. They rounded a bend and nearly collided with an elderly man coming up the trail. He wore a park ranger uniform, though something about it seemed dated, the style from decades past. His face was deeply lined, weathered like old leather, and his eyes were the palest blue Emma had ever seen. You shouldn't be here, he said without preamble. Not today. Not when the veil is thin. Marcus steadied himself against a tree, breathing hard. We're leaving. We just need to get back to the parking lot. The ranger looked past them, up the trail toward where the sounds had been coming from. The forest had gone silent. No birds, no wind, just oppressive, waiting quiet. You found the box, the ranger said. It wasn't a question. You read the journal. Emma's hand instinctively went to her backpack. How did you know about that? Because I'm the one who buried it. 26 years ago, 3 days after your parents died. He said it so matter-of-factly, so calmly, that it took a moment for the words to register. Marcus straightened. You knew what happened to them. All this time, you knew, and you said nothing? What would I have said? The ranger's expression was tired, infinitely weary. That they were taken by something that shouldn't exist. That this forest has places where the boundary between our world and something older, something darker, grows thin. That people have been vanishing from this trail since before the loggers came, before the first settlers, back when the indigenous tribes told stories about the tall walkers and avoided these woods entirely. He shook his head. I would have been dismissed as senile or insane. The box was my compromise, buried evidence for someone who might understand, for family who deserved answers, even terrible ones. You sent us the package, Emma said. Understanding dawning, the film canister, the note. I'm dying, he said simply. Cancer. The doctors give me weeks, maybe a month. I couldn't take this secret with me. Someone needed to know the truth before I'm gone. He gestured back up the trail. But you need to leave. Now. The anniversary of their deaths is today, and the forest remembers. The things that live in the deep places, they remember too. Marcus's face had gone hard, skeptical. I'm not leaving until you tell us everything. What really happened to our parents? And don't give me folklore and ghost stories. Give me facts. The ranger studied him for a long moment, then sighed. Come with me. Not up the trail. There's a service road half a mile west. My truck is parked there. We'll talk somewhere safer. They followed him off the main trail, pushing through dense underbrush that showed no sign of regular foot traffic. Emma kept looking back, expecting to see something following, but the forest remained still. Too still. The absence of sound was more frightening than the strange footsteps had been. The service road appeared suddenly, a narrow gravel track barely wide enough for a vehicle. An old ranger truck sat parked beneath a canopy of cedar trees, its green paint faded and spotted with rust. The ranger unlocked the cab and gestured for them to get in. Inside, the truck smelled of old coffee and pine sap. The ranger pulled a worn folder from the glove compartment and handed it to Emma. Inside were photographs, crime scene photos, though they'd clearly never been official. The images showed a campsite in disarray, a tent with the side torn open, the material shredded, sleeping bags pulled halfway out, one of them soaked with what looked like blood. And everywhere, in the dirt around the campsite, those same tracks, large, barefoot, but wrong. The toes too long, the spacing too wide, the impression too deep for any human weight. I was first on scene, the ranger said quietly. October 16th, 1997. A group of hikers found the campsite and reported it. I hiked in with 2 other rangers and a sheriff's deputy. We saw this. He pointed at one of the photos. And we knew. We all knew. But by the time the official investigation team arrived the next day, the rain had come, washed away the tracks, washed away most of the blood. What was left could be explained away. Animal attack. Bears, they said. Though no bear leaves tracks like that. Marcus was staring at a photo showing something else, symbols carved into a nearby tree trunk. The same symbols they'd found on the stones of the cairn. What do these mean? He asked. Warning, the ranger said. Or maybe claiming. The local tribes had different interpretations, but the meaning was the same. Stay away. This place is not for you. He took a shaky breath. I found your mother 3 days later, a quarter mile from the campsite, in a ravine. She was still alive. Barely. Emma's world tilted. What? She lived for 6 hours after I found her. Never regained consciousness. The medical examiner listed cause of death as massive trauma from a fall. Broken neck, shattered ribs, internal bleeding. But I saw her before the official team arrived. I saw the marks on her body. They weren't from a fall. Where is she buried? Emma's voice didn't sound like her own. We were told they never found the bodies. The ranger's pale eyes met hers. That's because there was no body to find. By the time I went back with the recovery team, she was gone. Just gone. No blood trail, no signs of animal scavenging, nothing. Like she'd never been there at all. He paused. And your father? We never found any trace of him. Not his body. Not his clothes. Nothing. It was like he'd been erased from existence. They sat in the truck for a long time. The silence broken only by the occasional creak of settling metal and the distant sound of wind through the trees. Emma felt numb, her mind struggling to process information that contradicted everything she'd been told, everything she'd believed for 26 years. Why didn't you come forward? Marcus finally asked, his voice tight with barely controlled anger. Why didn't you tell someone? Tell us? I tried. The ranger's voice was flat, defeated. I filed reports. I showed my superiors the photos. I begged them to close the trail. They buried it all, said I was experiencing stress, suggested early retirement. When I pushed harder, they threatened me with psychiatric evaluation. The state didn't want another unsolved mystery scaring away tourists. The Forest Service didn't want liability. So they created a narrative that was easier to accept. Lost hikers, tragic accident, case closed. He pulled out another photo, this one older, black and white, the edges yellowed with age. It showed a group of young people, 5 of them, standing at the trailhead. The date written on the back was 1952. The Carlson hiking party, he said, vanished without a trace. Before that, in 1938, a pair of newlyweds. In 1923, a Boy Scout troop, though 3 of those boys were eventually found. They never spoke again. Not one word for the rest of their lives. He spread more photos across the dashboard. Different eras, different people, but all missing from the same stretch of trail. This forest has been taking people for as long as anyone can remember. The indigenous peoples knew. They had rules, boundaries they wouldn't cross. We ignored those rules. Emma picked up one of the photos. A young woman, maybe 20, smiling at the camera. The date said 1974. What are they? The things that took our parents? I don't know if there's a name for them in English, the ranger said. The Karok people called them something that translates roughly to those who walk between. The Yurok had a different name. What I know is this. They're old. Older than human settlement, older than recorded history. They live in the deep places, the forgotten places, and most of the time they stay there. But sometimes, when conditions are right, when the barrier between worlds thins, they cross over. They hunt. That's impossible, Marcus said, but his voice lacked conviction. Is it? The ranger looked at him steadily. You read your father's journal. You saw the photos. You heard them in the forest just now. Tell me, what's your rational explanation for all of this? Marcus had no answer. Emma thought about her years of study, her understanding of human psychology, criminal behavior, the scientific method. Everything she'd learned insisted there had to be a logical explanation. Mass hallucination, elaborate hoax, undiscovered animal species. But none of those theories fit the evidence. None of them explained the journal entries, the photos, the way their mother's body had simply vanished from a secured location. The package you sent us, she said slowly. The film from our parents' camera. How did you get it? I found it at the campsite, in the tent. Your father must have dropped it when... He trailed off, not finishing the sentence. I had it developed privately. Kept one set of prints for myself. Sent you the negatives. because I thought you deserved to see what they saw. In those last moments, Emma pulled out her phone and scrolled to the photos she'd taken of the developed film. The last image, the inside of the tent, the flashlight beam, and that shape in the corner. She zoomed in, enhancing the image as much as her phone would allow. It wasn't a hand. Not quite. The proportions were wrong, the joints too numerous, the skin texture rough and bark-like. And beyond it, barely visible in the deep shadows outside the tent mesh, was a suggestion of something larger. Something tall and impossibly thin, with too many limbs arranged in configurations that hurt to look at. There are more of them now, the ranger said quietly. Or maybe they're bolder, hungrier. Every year the disappearances increase, not just here, but in deep forests across the Pacific Northwest. People blame it on increased foot traffic, inexperienced hikers, better reporting. But I've been tracking the patterns for 40 years. Something's changing. The boundaries are weakening. A sound made them all freeze. A long, resonant call, echoing through the forest. It was the same hollow note they'd heard before, but closer now. Much closer. The truck's windows fogged slightly with their breath, and in that condensation, Emma saw movement reflected from outside. Something tall passing between the trees behind them. "Don't look," the ranger said sharply. "Don't make eye contact. Don't acknowledge it. Just sit very still." The shape paused. Emma could see it in her peripheral vision, a dark silhouette that seemed to shimmer and shift, its outline refusing to stay solid. It was impossibly tall, at least 9 feet, with limbs that were too long and bent in too many places. Where its head should have been was something that might have been a face, but the features were wrong, arranged in a pattern that suggested intelligence but not humanity. It tilted what might have been its head, as if listening, or tasting the air. Oh, then, with movements that were fluid yet jerking, like stop-motion animation, it turned and melted back into the forest. None of them moved for a full minute after it disappeared. When the ranger finally spoke, his voice was shaking. "You need to leave this place. Leave and never come back. Tell no one what you've learned. These things, they have ways of knowing. If you draw attention, if you try to expose them, they'll come for you. Not here, but in your homes, in the dark. They can cross boundaries when they're sufficiently motivated." "No," Emma said. Her voice was steady, though her hands trembled. "No, our parents deserve better than to be forgotten. All these people deserve better. We're not running away." "Then you're fools," the ranger said bluntly. "Your parents fought and they died. Your mother survived long enough to write in that journal, to try to warn others, and it didn't matter. Nothing changed. Nothing will change. These woods belong to them. They always have." Marcus was staring at the photo of the shape outside the tent. "There has to be a way to stop them, to kill them. If they're physical enough to leave tracks, to tear open tents, then they're physical enough to die." The ranger laughed, a bitter, hollow sound. "Dozens of people have thought that over the years. Hunters, soldiers, people with guns and experience and determination. Their bodies are never found either. These things aren't animals, son. They're not even what we'd recognize as alive. There's something else, something in between." Emma's mind was racing, piecing together fragments of information, building a theory. "The mushroom circles," she said. "In Dad's journal, he mentioned mushrooms growing in a perfect circle near the campsite. Mom told him not to touch them." The ranger nodded slowly. "Fairy rings, some call them. Markers of thin places. Your parents camped right on top of a boundary point. They might as well have set up their tent in a doorway." "Are there more?" Emma asked. "More of these boundary points on the trail?" Dozens, maybe hundreds. This whole forest is riddled with them. It's why the disappearances cluster in certain areas, why some parts of the trail are safe and others, he gestured vaguely, aren't. Marcus leaned forward. If you know where they are, show us. Give us maps, coordinates, anything. We can warn people. Close those sections of trail. I gave the Forest Service detailed maps 20 years ago. They're sitting in a file somewhere, ignored. They don't want to know. Most people don't want to know. The truth is too uncomfortable, too far outside what we're taught is possible. The ranger pulled out a folded topographical map from under his seat, covered in hand-drawn annotations and symbols. But if you're determined to be fools, at least be informed fools. These red marks are confirmed thin places. Blue marks are probable. Black marks are where bodies were found, or where people were last seen. The map was covered in marks, far more than Emma had imagined. The entire Whispering Pines trail system was a web of danger zones, with safe passages threading between them like narrow corridors through a minefield. The anniversary of their death is today, Emma said, realization dawning. October 15th. That's why you sent the package now. That's why you brought us here. The ranger's expression was grim. The veil is thinnest on anniversaries, especially death anniversaries. If you're going to understand what happened, if you're going to see the truth, it has to be today. But understand this, once you know, once you truly see them, they'll know you too. You'll be marked forever. Emma and Marcus looked at each other. She could see the same war playing out behind his eyes that raged in her own mind. The sensible choice was to walk away, take what they'd learned and leave. But they'd spent their entire lives haunted by questions, by the absence of answers, by the hole their parents' disappearance had left in their souls. We need to see the campsite, Emma said. The actual location where they died. You're certain? The ranger asked. Yes. He studied them both for a long moment, then nodded slowly. Then we go now. While there's still daylight. Once the sun sets in these woods, the rules change, and even I won't venture into the deep places after dark. The ranger's name was Thomas Whitmore, and he'd been working these woods for 43 years. He told them this as they hiked, his pace steady despite his age and illness. Emma noticed he moved with the careful awareness of someone who'd spent a lifetime in wild places, stepping over roots without looking down, ducking branches before they appeared, reading the forest. Like others read books, they left the main trail after a mile, following what might have been a game path or might have been nothing at all. The forest grew denser, the canopy thicker, until the afternoon sun barely penetrated. The temperature dropped noticeably, and Emma found herself pulling her jacket tighter, despite the exertion of hiking. We're crossing into older growth, Whitmore said, pausing to let them catch up. The trees here predate European settlement. Some of them are 500–600 years old. The forest has long memory. It remembers everything that's happened beneath its branches. Marcus checked his GPS, frowning. The signal's getting weak. We should mark our path back. Won't matter, Whitmore said. The forest shifts, not physically, but perceptually. You can walk in a straight line and end up traveling in circles. It's part of how they protect their territory, how they confuse prey. He pulled a ball of bright orange surveyor's tape from his pack and began tying strips to branches as they walked. This helps, sometimes, if the forest allows it. They walked for another 20 minutes, descending into a ravine thick with ferns and moss-covered stones. The air here felt different, heavier somehow, charged with a quality that made Emma's skin prickle. She noticed Marcus kept touching his phone, checking for signal, finding none. They were completely cut off from the outside world. There, Whitmore said, pointing ahead. The clearing appeared suddenly, as if the forest had deliberately hidden it, until the last moment. It was exactly as Emma had imagined from her father's journal descriptions. A small level space, ringed by ancient cedars, with a view down into the valley below. Beautiful, peaceful, and wrong in ways she couldn't articulate. The remains of the campsite were still visible after 26 years. 4 stones, arranged in a fire ring, blackened with soot. Patches of ground where the grass grew differently, thinner, as if the earth remembered where the tent had stood. And everywhere, carved into tree trunks, scratched into rocks, traced in patterns of mushrooms and lichen, were those symbols, warnings or claims or something else entirely. "This is where I found your mother," Whitmore said quietly, pointing to a spot at the clearing's edge. She'd crawled there from deeper in the forest. Her fingernails were broken, from clawing her way up the ravine. There was a trail of blood behind her that led down to— he paused, seemed to reconsider— to where I couldn't follow, where I wouldn't follow. Emma walked to the center of the clearing. The ground felt wrong beneath her feet, slightly yielding, as if the soil here was less solid than it should be. She knelt and pressed her palm against the earth. It was cold, far colder than the surrounding ground. And beneath her hand, she felt something, a vibration, a pulse, like the slow, steady heartbeat of something vast and ancient, sleeping just below the surface. "Do you feel it?" Whitmore asked. "The thin place, this is a doorway, has been for centuries, probably millennia. Your parents camped right on top of it." Marcus was photographing the symbols carved into the trees, his face drawn and pale. "These are all over the place. Dozens of them. How long have they been here? Some are new. Some are older than the Park Service. The things that live here, they mark their territory the way animals do. But their territory exists in more than 3 dimensions. It overlaps with ours, intersects with it, bleeds through in places like this." Emma stood and turned in a slow circle, taking in the entire clearing. The late afternoon sun angled through the trees at precisely the wrong angle, casting shadows that seemed too long, too dark, pointing in directions that didn't match the light source. And in those shadows, she thought she saw movement, shapes that were there when she wasn't looking directly at them, gone when she turned her head. "They're watching us right now, aren't they?" she said. Whitmore nodded. "They always watch, especially here, especially on the anniversary. They remember your parents. They remember everyone who's died in these woods. I think the deaths feed them somehow, sustain them. Or maybe they're collecting something, souls, life force, I don't know. But the people who vanish here don't just die. They're taken, consumed, incorporated into whatever these things are." Marcus pulled out the journal, flipping to the last entry. "Mom wrote that she understood. That she understood everything. What did she mean? I don't know," Whitmore admitted. "She never woke up after I found her. But her eyes were open, staring at something I couldn't see. And she was smiling. Not peacefully. It was the kind of smile people get when they've seen something that breaks them, when they've understood something humans aren't meant to understand." Emma felt suddenly cold. She thought about her mother's final hours, alone in this forest, injured and terrified, watching something drag her husband into the darkness. What had she seen? What had she learned that made her smile that horrible smile? A sound echoed through the clearing, that same hollow, breathing call they'd heard before. But this time it came from multiple directions at once, overlapping and harmonizing in ways that created dissonant chords that made Emma's teeth ache. "They're calling to each other," Whitmore said, his voice tight. "Communicating. They know we're here, and they're deciding what to do about it. The shadows at the clearing's edge began to move, not slowly or subtly, but with deliberate intent. They detached from the trees and flowed across the ground like liquid darkness, pooling at the boundary between the clearing and the forest. Within those shadows, shapes began to form. Tall, too tall, with too many joints and limbs that bent wrong. "Don't run," Whitmore said sharply. "Running triggers pursuit. Stand your ground. Show no fear. Sometimes they'll lose interest if you don't act like prey." But Emma couldn't move, even if she wanted to. She was frozen, watching as the shapes solidified. There were 3 of them, maybe 4. It was hard to tell where one ended and another began. They stood at the clearing's edge, perfectly still, their wrongly jointed limbs hanging at impossible angles. Where their faces should have been were smooth expanses of bark-like skin, broken only by deep cracks that might have been mouths or might have been something else entirely. The largest one tilted its head, mimicking human curiosity, but getting the angle wrong, rotating too far. It raised one impossibly long arm and pointed directly at Emma. The gesture was unmistakable, deliberate, recognition. "It knows you," Whitmore whispered. "Oh, God. It recognizes you." The thing's arm dropped, and it took a step forward, not into the clearing, but testing the boundary, seeing if it could cross. Its foot touched the edge of where the grass began, and there was a sound like distant thunder, a vibration that Emma felt in her bones. The creature jerked back, as if shocked. "They can't enter the clearing during daylight," Whitmore said, relief evident in his voice. "The doorway works both ways. It's a boundary they can't cross when the sun's up. But we have maybe an hour of light left. After that—" He didn't finish the sentence. Marcus grabbed Emma's arm. "We need to leave, now." But Emma was staring at the largest creature, at the way it stood, the proportions of its body, and with sudden horrible certainty she knew. She knew what she was looking at. "Dad," she whispered. The thing's head snapped toward her at the sound. Those cracks that might have been a mouth widened, and from deep within its chest came a sound, almost like words, almost like her name, but filtered through something inhuman, something that had once been David Mercer, but had been transformed into something else, something wrong. Marcus's hand tightened on Emma's arm. "That's not him. That's not Dad. It's just trying to confuse us, to make us look at the way it moves." Emma interrupted, her voice hollow. "The slight favoring of the left side. Dad broke his hip when I was 5. He always compensated, shifted his weight. That thing is doing the same thing." The creature that might have been David Mercer took another step toward the boundary, and again, the thunderous vibration stopped it. But this time it didn't retreat. It stood there, swaying slightly, and that sound came again from its chest. Definitely words now, though mangled and distorted. "Emma, Marcus, run." Whitmore's face had gone gray. Sometimes they keep pieces, memories, fragments of who they were. It makes the hunting easier. They can mimic voices, behaviors, lure in the loved ones of their victims. He pulled a flare gun from his pack with shaking hands. "But I've never seen one retain this much, never seen one that could still speak." The other shapes were moving now, circling the clearing, but staying outside its boundary. Emma counted 5 of them total. 5 tall, wrong-jointed things that had once been human and had been changed into something else, something that existed in the spaces between what was real and what shouldn't be possible. "Which one is Mom?" Marcus asked, his voice breaking. Whitmore shook his head. "I don't know. When I found her body, it was still human, still her. But by the time I came back with help, she was gone." Maybe she died naturally from her injuries, and they took the body. Or maybe... He looked at the circling shapes. Maybe the transformation happens after death. Maybe it requires death. The David thing spoke again. Its voice stronger now, more coherent. You shouldn't have come. Tried to warn you. Buried the journal. Left the clues. Thought you'd understand. Thought you'd stay away. Emma's mind reeled. You buried the box. You sent the package. Wanted you to know. Wanted you to understand. But wanted you gone. Safe. The thing's head tilted again. That horrible too-far rotation. Too late now. They know you. They've seen you. They'll follow. Even if you leave. They'll find you in the dark. In the spaces between. They'll take you like they took us. One of the other creatures moved closer to the David thing. This one was shorter, with long hair that hung in matted tangles, and even transformed. Emma could see the echo of her mother in its proportions. The Claire thing reached out, with one too long arm, and touched the David thing's shoulder. A gesture of comfort or restraint, impossible to tell. The ranger was right, the David thing continued. Run. Leave these woods. Don't come back. Don't look for us. Don't mourn us. We're not your parents anymore. Haven't been for 26 years. We're something else now. Something hungry. What happened to you? Emma asked, tears streaming down her face. What are you? We died. They found us. They changed us. Now we serve. Now we hunt. Now we wait in the deep places for others to cross over. For the boundaries to thin. For the anniversary days when we can remember what we were. The thing's voice was fading, becoming less human with each word. Becoming one of them is better than death. That's what we tell ourselves. That's the lie that keeps us walking. But it's not true. Death would have been mercy. The sun was sinking lower, the shadows lengthening, the light in the clearing taking on the golden quality of late afternoon, bleeding into evening. Emma could see the creatures at the edge, becoming more solid, more defined, as if the approaching darkness gave them substance. How do we stop this? Marcus demanded. How do we kill them? Free you? The David thing made a sound that might have been a laugh. You don't. Once you're changed forever. Part of the forest, part of the cycle. The only way to stop it is to close the doorways, seal the thin places. But there are hundreds of them, thousands, all across these mountains, and they're opening wider every year. Whitmore was checking his watch nervously. We have maybe 30 minutes of direct sunlight left. We need to go. Now. But Emma couldn't move. She was staring at what remained of her parents, at the things they'd become, and a terrible understanding was dawning. You've been trying to warn people. The symbols, the cairn, the buried box. You've been trying to save others from your fate. We remember enough to regret, the Claire thing said, its voice a whisper, like wind through hollow trees. We remember enough to hate what we've become. We remember enough to try even though we know it's futile. Others will come. Others will die. Others will join us. The forest always takes more. The creatures were all at the boundary now, a semicircle of wrongness pressing against the invisible barrier that kept them from entering the clearing. Emma could see more shapes behind them, deeper in the forest. Dozens of them, maybe hundreds. All the people who'd vanished from these woods over the decades, all transformed, all trapped in this half-existence between life and death. There has to be a way to reverse it, Emma said desperately. Some ritual, some cure. There isn't, the David thing said flatly. We've had 26 years to search for one. There's no going back, only forward, only deeper into what we've become. It paused. But you can stop others from joining us. You can close this doorway, this clearing. It's one of the oldest, one of the strongest. Close it, and maybe others will follow. How? Marcus asked. Salt and iron buried at the cardinal points. Rowan wood burned in the center. Symbols carved in the old language, the one the first peoples knew. It won't destroy us, but it will seal the boundary. Make it so the doorway can't open, so no more can cross over. The thing gestured with one malformed limb toward the setting sun. But you have to do it during daylight. After dark, we can cross. After dark, we'll stop you. Whitmore was already pulling supplies from his pack. Salt in sealed bags, iron railroad spikes, bundles of dried wood. I came prepared, he said grimly, just in case. I've been wanting to close this doorway for 26 years. Never had the courage to try alone. They worked quickly, Marcus and Emma following Whitmore's instructions. North, south, east, west. At each cardinal point, they dug a small hole, poured in salt, drove in an iron spike. The creatures watched, pressing closer to the boundary with each spike placed, their forms becoming more agitated, more solid, as the light failed. Emma carved symbols into the largest tree at each point, copying from a page Whitmore had torn from a journal. The marks looked similar to the ones carved everywhere around the clearing, but reversed somehow, mirror images. Protective rather than claiming. The sun touched the horizon. Maybe 10 minutes of direct light remained. They piled the rowan wood in the center of the clearing, in the exact spot where Emma had felt that pulse, that heartbeat of the thin place itself. When we light this, Whitmore said, they're going to try to stop us. The barrier will weaken as the doorway closes. For a few minutes, they'll be able to cross. We'll have to hold them off long enough for the ritual to complete. He handed Marcus a flare, gave Emma a can of pepper spray that seemed laughably inadequate. He kept the flare gun for himself. 3 people, 3 weapons, against dozens of creatures that had once been human and were now something else entirely. Last chance to run, Whitmore said. Emma looked at her parents, at the things they'd become, standing at the clearing's edge. The David thing raised one malformed hand. A wave, a goodbye, a blessing. She raised her own hand in response. Light it, she said. Marcus struck the flare and dropped it onto the pile of rowan wood. The flames caught it immediately, burning with an unnatural brightness, casting stark shadows that danced and writhed. The moment the fire touched the wood, everything changed. The pulse Emma had felt earlier became a scream, a vibration so intense it drove her to her knees. The air itself seemed to tear, reality splitting like fabric, and through that split, she could see. She could see the true nature of the forest, the layers upon layers of existence stacked on top of each other, worlds bleeding into worlds, and in the spaces between, things that should not be possible writhing and watching. The barrier fell. The creatures surged forward. The first creature to cross the boundary was one Emma didn't recognize. Something that had been human so long ago, its original form was completely subsumed. It moved with horrifying speed, limbs bending in impossible configurations as it scuttled across the clearing like a spider. Whitmore fired the flare gun, the projectile catching the thing in what passed for its chest. It shrieked, a sound like tearing metal, and fell back burning. More came behind it, too many to count. They poured from the forest in a wave of wrongness, all clicking joints and 2 long limbs, and those terrible smooth faces with their crack mouths opening to emit sounds that weren't quite words. Marcus swung a burning branch from the fire, keeping them at bay. But for every one he drove back, 2 more pressed forward. Emma sprayed pepper spray into the face crack of a giant creature lunging at her. It recoiled, stumbling but didn't fall. These things were beyond pain, beyond fear. They were driven by something else. Hunger, need, or maybe just the desperate instinct to protect the doorway that sustained them. The Rowan fire burned higher, flames shooting 10 feet into the air, the heat intense enough to drive everyone back. The symbols Emma had carved into the trees began to glow with a pale green light, pulsing in rhythm with the flames. The ground beneath the fire started to crack, fissures spreading outward in a perfect circle, and from those cracks came light, brilliant to searing light that belonged to neither day nor night, but something in between. The creatures screamed, all of them in unison, a chorus of anguish that made Emma's ears ring. They were being hurt by the light, their forms becoming less solid, more translucent. She could see through them now, see the forest beyond, see the layers of reality reasserting themselves, separating, the boundaries solidifying. The David thing stood at the edge of the clearing, not advancing, not retreating. Beside it, the Claire thing, both of them watching as the doorway closed, as the thin place sealed. And then, with movements that seemed almost deliberate, they turned and walked back into the forest, not fleeing, choosing, accepting. "Dad!" Emma screamed. "Mom!" They didn't look back. They merged with the shadows between the trees and were gone, taking their place among the dozens of other shapes retreating into the deep forest, driven back by the light, by the closing of the doorway they'd guarded and been trapped by for 26 years. The last of the creatures fell back across the boundary, just as the sun set completely. The moment full darkness arrived, the barrier snapped back into place, with a sound like a thunderclap. The Rowan fire flared once, brilliant and final, then settled into normal flames. The clearing was suddenly profoundly silent. No creature sounds, no wind, just the crackle of the fire, and 3 people breathing hard, alive, somehow still standing. Whitmore sank to his knees, the flare gun slipping from his hands. "It's done," he said, his voice hoarse. "The doorway is closed, sealed." Emma walked to the edge of the clearing, to the spot where her parents had disappeared into the forest. The boundary was there, invisible but tangible, a wall of resistance when she tried to push past it. On the other side, the forest was dark, impenetrably dark, and somewhere in that darkness her parents walked, trapped in forms that were no longer human, guarding a doorway that was now close to them. "They're still out there," she said quietly. "Yes," Whitmore agreed, "but they can't cross here anymore, can't lure anyone else into this clearing, can't add more victims to their number. It's not freedom, but it's something." Marcus was extinguishing the fire, stomping on embers, making sure nothing spread beyond the ritual circle. His face was streaked with soot and tears, his hands shaking. "We closed one doorway. You said there are hundreds." "I did," Whitmore said. "And there are. But closing this one proves it can be done. It gives us a template, a method." He looked at them both. "If you're willing to continue, if you're willing to spend your lives fighting something most people don't even believe exists." Emma thought about her parents, about the journal entries, about all the people who'd vanished into these woods over the decades, all the families left without answers, without closure. She thought about the shapes in the darkness, trapped between life and death, serving something ancient and hungry that used human bodies as vessels. "I'm willing," she said. Marcus nodded slowly. "So am I." They stayed in the clearing until the fire burned down to coals. Whitmore checked the iron spikes, reinforced the salt circles, carved additional protective symbols. The boundary held. The doorway remained closed. When they finally hiked out, following Whitmore's orange tape through the darkness, with flashlights casting weak beams, Emma kept looking back, kept expecting to see shapes following. But the forest behind them remained empty. They reached the service road near midnight. Whitmore's truck started on the first try, and they drove in silence back to the main parking lot, where Emma and Marcus's rental SUV waited. The lot was empty, their vehicle the only one remaining, looking abandoned and lonely under the single functioning streetlight. "What happens now?" Marcus asked. Whitmore pulled out a battered notebook, filled with maps and coordinates and years of careful documentation. "Now we plan, we research, we find the other doorways and we close them one by one. It'll take years, maybe decades, maybe lifetimes." He handed the notebook to Emma. "But someone has to do it. Someone has to stand between the world and the things that wait in the deep places." Emma took the notebook, feeling its weight. It wasn't just paper and ink. It was responsibility, purpose, a mission that would define the rest of her life. "We'll need help," she said. "Researchers, believers, people who understand what's out there." "I know a few," Whitmore said. "Not many, but a few. People who've lost loved ones to these woods. People who've seen things they can't explain. We'll start small. Build a network. Document everything." He paused. "And we'll do it quietly. Because the moment the wrong people notice, the moment authorities start asking questions, we'll be shut down, dismissed, buried under bureaucracy and skepticism." They stood beside their vehicles, three people who now shared a terrible knowledge, a burden that would never fully lift. Emma thought about returning to her normal life, her practice, her patients who came to her with problems that seemed trivial now in comparison. How could she go back to that world knowing what she knew? "The notebook," Whitmore said. "Guard it. Everything I've learned in 43 years is in those pages. Every doorway I've found, every pattern I've identified, every ritual that worked or failed. It's my life's work. Now it's yours." He climbed into his truck, started the engine. Before he pulled away, he rolled down the window. "Your parents died human," he said. "Remember that. Whatever they became, whatever they are now, they died trying to protect each other. Died fighting. That matters." Then he was gone, taillights disappearing into the night, leaving Emma and Marcus alone in the parking lot, with a notebook full of secrets and a mission they'd never asked for but couldn't refuse. 6 months later, Emma stood in a bookstore cafe in Portland, watching people come and go, wrapped in their normal lives, unaware of the darkness that existed just beyond the edges of their safe, rational world. Her laptop was open in front of her, but she wasn't looking at it. She was watching Marcus across the room, talking to a woman in her 50s who'd lost her daughter to the Cascade Mountains 3 years ago. They'd closed 4 more doorways since Whispering Pines. Each one had been different. Each one had been dangerous. But each one had worked. 4 thin places sealed. 4 hunting grounds denied to the things that waited in the deep places. Thomas Whitmore had died in January, the cancer finally claiming him. But before he passed, he'd introduced them to others, a network of people who knew, who'd seen, who'd survived encounters with things that shouldn't exist. Slowly, carefully, they were building something, a quiet resistance against forces most people would never believe in. Emma's phone buzzed. A text from an unknown number. "Found something in the Olympic National Forest. Symbols matching your descriptions. Can you come?" She looked at Marcus. He'd seen the text too. The woman he'd been talking to was crying now, but there was something like hope in her expression. Hope that someone finally believed her. Hope that her daughter's disappearance meant something, was part of a pattern, could maybe be avenged, even if it couldn't be prevented. Emma typed back, "We'll be there tomorrow." She closed her laptop and walked to the window. Outside, Seattle sprawled beneath a gray sky, millions of people going about their lives. How many of them had walked trails like whispering pines? How many had camped in clearings where the ground pulsed with wrongness? How many had disappeared into thin places and been forgotten, dismissed as tragic accidents or willing departures? The notebook Whitmore had given her was in her bag, swollen now with additional notes, new maps, photographs of symbols and tracks, and things that shouldn't exist but did. It was heavier than it had been 6 months ago, not physically, but in every other way that mattered. Her phone buzzed again. This time, a news article. Hiker vanishes in Gifford-Pinchot National Forest. Search continues. Emma read the article carefully. Male, 32. Experienced hiker. Last seen on a well-marked trail. No signs of foul play. His campsite found intact, except for a torn tent and unusual tracks nearby. The Forest Service was calling it a bear attack, but the description of the tracks didn't match any known animal. She forwarded the article to Marcus with a single word. Another. He looked up from his conversation, read it, nodded grimly. The woman he'd been talking to saw his expression and asked a question. Emma watched as he showed her the article, watched as recognition flickered across her face. She'd seen those same tracks, near where her daughter had vanished. She knew. They were all starting to know. Emma thought about her parents, still walking in the forest between worlds, trapped in forms that were no longer human. She wondered if they were aware, if they suffered, if closing the doorway had brought them any measure of peace, or just locked them away from the only purpose their transformed existence had known. She'd tried to find them. They all had. But the forest was vast, and the creatures that inhabited it were good at hiding, good at existing in the spaces where perception failed, where rational minds refused to look. Maybe someday she'd see them again. Maybe someday she'd find a way to free them, to release them from whatever bound them to their transformed state. But for now, all she could do was prevent others from joining them. One doorway at a time, one thin place sealed, one family spared the agony of never knowing what happened to their loved ones. Marcus finished his conversation and joined her at the window. She wants to help, he said. She's a cartographer. Thinks she can map the disappearances, find patterns we've missed. Good, Emma said. We need all the help we can get. Outside, the rain started to fall, washing the streets clean, sending people scurrying for cover. Somewhere to the north, in forests deep and old, things that had once been human waited in the spaces between trees, waited for the boundaries to thin, for the unwary to stumble into their domain, for the cycle to continue. But now, finally, someone was fighting back. Emma picked up her bag, heavy with responsibility and terrible knowledge. She looked at Marcus, saw the same determination in his eyes that she felt in her own heart. Olympic National Forest tomorrow, she said. And then, wherever the trail leads next, he nodded. Until all the doorways are closed. Until all the doorways are closed, she agreed. They walked out of the cafe together, into the rain, into the work that would define the rest of their lives. Behind them, the woman Marcus had spoken with watched them go, then pulled out her own phone. She had calls to make, maps to draw, stories to collect. The network was growing, slowly, quietly, but growing. In the deep places, in the forests where reality grew thin, the things that waited would continue to hunt. But now they would be hunted in return. Now someone was watching. Someone was mapping their territories, closing their doorways, learning their patterns. The war between worlds had been one-sided for too long. Not anymore.